Maxed Out Racing for the PlayStation 2 is an obscure title in the realm of racing games, remembered less for any particular innovation and more for the frustration it elicited in its players. Released during a time when the PS2 was home to some of the most iconic racing titles of all time, Maxed Out Racing is not one of them.
Perhaps the most defining and damning feature of Maxed Out Racing is its atrocious steering mechanics. Racing games live and die by their handling. After all, the entire premise of the genre is to navigate a vehicle through a course as smoothly and quickly as possible. Unfortunately, Maxed Out Racing falls flat in this regard, with what can only be described as one of the most infuriating driving experiences on the PS2.
The game suffers from severe oversteering, which plagues every vehicle you attempt to control. Oversteering, in essence, occurs when the car turns more sharply than intended, often leading to spinouts or crashes, especially at high speeds. In Maxed Out Racing, this issue is not just a minor inconvenience but a persistent flaw that permeates every race. The slightest tilt of the analog stick sends your car careening out of control, and attempts to correct course often result in an equally disastrous overcorrection.
This oversteering problem is compounded by an inconsistent and sluggish response time from the controls. It feels as if there is a delay between when you input a command and when the game acknowledges it, making it nearly impossible to anticipate or adjust to the game's erratic behavior. The result is a racing game where you're not battling opponents or mastering tracks, but rather wrestling with the basic mechanics of driving.
Once more, worst oversteer picking for good television ever experienced in a game. Look at other reviews on YouTube. I dare you. They all say the steering is dogshit. Leave my primary national insurance number provider alone.
While the gameplay itself leaves much to be desired, the user interface and overall presentation of Maxed Out Racing offer a different kind of entertainment value. One that can best be described as enjoyably kitsch. There's a certain charm to the game's low-budget aesthetic, which, intentionally or not, ends up being one of the game's most memorable aspects.
The main menus and in-game HUD are garish and cluttered, a stark contrast to the sleek, minimalist designs that typify more successful racing franchises. The colors are loud and clashing, with neon greens, yellows, and reds dominating the screen. The fonts are bulky and exaggerated, reminiscent of arcade cabinets from the late 80s and early 90s. While this design choice is far from elegant, it does give Maxed Out Racing a distinct personality, albeit one that leans heavily into the realm of the ridiculous.
The same can be said for the overall presentation of the game. The music, a repetitive mix of generic rock and techno beats, blares in the background, adding to the chaotic and almost surreal atmosphere. Again, while this aspect of the game isn't what one would traditionally label as good, it's so over the top that it becomes amusing in its own right.
In a way, the user interface and presentation are where Maxed Out Racing shines. If you can appreciate it for what it is, a piece of video game ephemera so steeped in its own eccentricity that it almost becomes endearing. For those who enjoy a bit of kitsch in their gaming experience, navigating the menus of Maxed Out Racing can be a guilty pleasure.
Unfortunately, the visual experience of Maxed Out Racing does little to redeem the game's many flaws. Even by the standards of the PlayStation 2 era, the graphics in Maxed Out Racing are decidedly subpar. The game's environments are bland and uninspired, with tracks that lack any real detail or creativity. Textures are muddy and flat, giving the impression that the game's developers cut corners to meet a tight deadline or budget.
The cars themselves, which should be the visual centerpiece of any racing game, are equally underwhelming. The models are simplistic and lack the fine details that would make them stand out. There's a plastic-like sheen to the vehicles, making them look more like toy cars than the high-performance machines they are supposed to represent. This lack of detail extends damage models as well. Crashes result in little more than a few scratches or dents, with no real sense of impact or destruction.
The game's color palette does little to help the situation. Many of the tracks and environments are washed out, with gray and brown tones dominating the screen, even when the game attempts to introduce more vibrant colors. As seen in some of the urban night races, the effect is muted by poor lighting and lackluster effects. The overall visual experience is one of drearinish, far removed from the high-octane excitement that good racing games strive to evoke.
Sound design in Maxed Out Racing is another area where the game falters. As mentioned earlier, the soundtrack is a repetitive mix of generic rock and techno tunes, none of which are particularly memorable. The tracks loop endlessly during races, quickly becoming more of an annoyance than a source of motivation or excitement.
The sound effects are similarly disappointing. Engine noises lack the deep, throaty roar that one would expect from high-performance racing vehicles. Instead, they sound tinny and artificial, more like a toy remote-controlled car than a powerful racing machine. Collisions, too, are underwhelming, with crashes sounding more like a dull thud than a bone-crushing impact.
Maxed Out Racing is a game that tried to carve out its niche in a crowded genre, but ended up as a footnote in the annals of racing games. Its frustrating steering mechanics, kitschy presentation, subpar graphics, and uninspired sound design all contribute to an experience that is, at best, forgettable and, at worst, infuriating. For racing enthusiasts, the PlayStation 2 offers a wealth of far superior titles that deliver on the promise of speed, excitement, and challenge. Maxed Out Racing may hold a certain nostalgic or kitsch appeal for some, but it is unlikely to be a title that many will revisit willingly.
In the end, Maxed Out Racing serves as a reminder of the importance of polish and playability in game design. While it may offer a few moments of unintentional humor or kitschy charm, these are not enough to overcome its glaring flaws. For most players, it is a title best left in the bargain bin, a curious relic of a bygone era in gaming.
You got wiped out!